Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Danielle and Anne, for making this happen. So, I'm here to speak about finding your unique mission in life. I can't tell you, probably by now, hundreds of thousands of people that I've asked this question to, and I pose it as well here. You know, you don't need to go to business school to know that Business 101 is you can't open a business, an organization, an entity without a mission statement. You have to have a mission statement, a vision or mission statement. Without that, you can't succeed, period. Google's mission statement, for example, is to organize all the information in the world and make it readily accessible. It's one line, simple, it's unique, and it's measurable. It's not platitudes. And what do they have, 100, 200,000 employees, everything they do has to fulfill that mission. I think Microsoft's mission, maybe they changed it, but if I recall, was a desktop in every home and in every office. Meaning that it has to provide tools, software that includes time management, cooking, finance, and that's their mission. So here's the question. If a business can't function without a mission statement, how can you? What is your personal mission statement? So first people giggle, and a little dismissive. And then they say, of course I have a mission. I said, what is it? Tell me. So here's the usual answer. To be happy, to make money, and to bring up a healthy family. Those are the three top. And I've not done a scientific survey, but those are the three. I don't know what you would say. But what I discovered over the years is that many people have not given it thought. We're already going 90 miles an hour on our merry-go-round of life, or if you want to call it a roller coaster, whatever you want to call it. That we're so busy surviving and existing and paying our bills, or when I say surviving, doesn't necessarily mean you aren't prosperous, but so busy in the rat race that we haven't stopped to think about it. And no one told us in school or at home that you have to have a mission in life. And then when you do think about it, you start wondering, so what exactly does that mean? What is my mission? What is my personal mission? But I can tell you this, that if a business can't fully function or function at all without that focal point, your life also, and I'm not challenging anyone's life, I'm not being here to be critical, is going to be quite fragmented and being driven by many different forces where you're responding and being reactive to rather than being proactive. It's just simple common sense. If you have a goal, an objective, a mission, so you have a goal, a destination, and that's what you're driving toward. If you don't, so where are you headed with your life? Now, there are many ways to analyze why we do or we don't. Some people attribute it to the fact that we live in a very comfortable world, high standard of living, everything is so easy. As ironic as it sounds, but during war, when you have to fight for your values, your value system becomes crystallized. When you're comfortable, comfort zones tend to create apathy. Where, there's always tomorrow. If, God forbid, we were attacked, your community, your family, your country, you then have to fight. And why do you fight? Because there's something you're fighting for. Freedom. You're fighting for your family. You're fighting for security. So the blessings of prosperity, the blessings of peace, actually, create this side effect of apathy. And I can't resist. I always remind myself of that line where the guy asked his friend, what's worse, apathy or ignorance? And he said, I don't know and I don't care. Apathy is like the kiss of death. And it tends to numb us from what really matters. I can just give you a small example. You all went through COVID a few years ago, right? I was invited to speak on a Zoom for around 1,000 public school students, teenagers, across the country. There was an educator who knew me, and then the schools were closed, and they were looking for all kinds of online programming. And kids, like adults, everybody was wondering. There was a lot of fear in the air. People were dying. We all know what was going on, the uncertainty, the disruption. And basically every industry came to stop. And I remember it was a Zoom, and Zoom, you can, people who participate can chat. So they opened up the chat, and I said, I want to ask everybody a question. And they had, the moderator was listing the answers. They had a type of like a survey. And I said, what are the 3 most important things in your life right now? This was June 2020. So we're smack right in the middle, beginning of COVID. And interestingly, these were 14 to 17-year-old teenagers, young teens. And most of them answered family, values, relationships. I said, what would you have answered if I asked you this question in January 2020? And almost the same 3 items came up, very different. Sex, video games, and sports. You see how that changed? Because as Warren Buffett put it about other matters in finance, he said, until the tide is out, you don't know who's been swimming naked. When the water is, everyone's successful, you don't yet know what you really carry. When you're challenged, I think it was Eleanor Roosevelt that said this about women, but you could say it about anybody in crisis. She said, a woman's like a tea bag. You don't know how strong she is until you put her into hot water. And a man says it's hot, But the truth is, challenges, I'm not suggesting we need to have more than necessary in our challenges, but challenges tend to force us to crystallize what we stand for. So you can basically say the comforts of our lives, which are such a great blessing, also tend to cloud and create a certain ambiguity of why we're here, what's your purpose, and what's your drive. When you have to fight for it, then you don't have that luxury. But we don't need to wait for tragedy, and we don't need to wait for loss. And that's why we're here to talk about this. I think it's one of the most important topics in life, even though it may not be your immediate concern, but long term, it's like I mentioned earlier about the foundation of a building. So you can have a building that's a beautiful building, and the foundation can be faulty. You may not know it immediately, but ultimately this building is going to be in danger. I would submit and say you can have your life working on a certain surface level, but when crisis strikes or other challenges come our way, if your foundations are not strong, that's when you see the difference between a strong ship or a strong tree or a weak tree when the storm strikes. So building a mission statement in your life is critical for success in every possible way. And it doesn't mean necessarily that you have to change your whole life. It just creates a focus, a crystallized focus. So I think it really comes down to a more important question. And that is the question of who are we? Who am I? If you, for example, take the approach, and I'll just use what I would like to we'll call the Freudian, Darwinian psychological model, that the driving force in a human being is pleasure, the id, especially sexual pleasure, and that it's all about me, my needs, survival of the fittest. Like the 2 guys that go camping one evening, middle of the night. One guy wakes up and says to the other guy, you got to get up, we got to get out of here. There's a bear out there. A bear. He's rustling about looking for food. And while he's telling him, let's get out of here, he's tying his shoelaces on his sneakers. And the guy says to him, what do you think? You can outrun the bear? He said, no, all I have to do is outrun you. That's the typical example of me. Take care of myself first. So if we are indeed that type of human being, and that is the prevalent, not that necessarily Freud is the go-to guy, but he's still the guy you got to disagree with in the world of psychology. But if you go with that attitude, which is, I would believe, the prevalent view, basically, I come first, everything comes second. A certain narcissistic view. However, as Freudian psychology tells us, there's an ego, there's a superego. To coexist, we need to have red lights and green lights. Not because we aren't selfish, but because we know that if everybody's going to drive in all directions, we'll all hurt each other. So we don't want to kill each other. But essentially, it's all about selfish survival, or as Richard Dawkins puts it in The Selfish Gene, everything is about self. Then in a way, you could say your mission is simply taking care of yourself, self-preservation, survival of your species. That's what drives this is most of today's, basically, we'll call it the biological perspective on human beings. However, if we see ourselves as transcendent creatures, beings that aren't just driven about me, the noble part of ourselves, virtue, kindness, generosity, love, not just about my own needs, but the ability to sacrifice for others, to serve others, then it's a very different way of looking at the human being. So I think that also bears. I think a good way to capture it is a nice anecdote where Lucy comes home from school one day and she's studying biology, the origin of our species, where do we originate from? And she's all confused, so she goes over to her mother and says, Mom, where do we come from? So her mother smiles, her face is beaming. She sits down her little daughter and tells her, well, we had a grandfather that came from a country in Europe, a great-great-grandfather that was a big scholar. And she says, our ancestors were very prestigious people, and the farther back we go, the better it gets. All the way back to Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. Okay, beautiful. Her father comes home, and Lucy goes to her father and says, Dad, where do we come from? So in stark contrast to her mother, her father gets his face gets very darkened, and he's all upset, he's all disturbed. He says, I rued this day, but sit down and brace yourself, I'll tell you. Millions of years ago, we were apes. And before that, amphibians. And prior to that, one-celled bacteria. As far back as we can find, 14 billion, 15 billion years ago, a ball of gas. That's where we originate from. Pretty different answers, right? So she runs back to her mother and says, Mom, I don't understand. I asked the same question to you and to Dad. Both of you gave very different answers. And her mother responded to her, we both told you the truth. I told you about my side of the family, and he told you about his side of the family. So there you have it. The ultimate reconciliation between creationism and evolution. Depends which side of the family. Guess what? Now, beyond the joke, there's some truth there. The fact is we do have two voices in us. We all know we have an ugly side that can be very selfish and almost animalistic. No one should ever be tested. But some people can really stoop to very low when they're threatened, when they're tortured. People ask the question, what would you do if you were tortured? And no one's watching. Would you turn in your brother and sister to save your own skin? So most of us would say, of course not. But don't be. And when people are under duress, we know during avalanches or when there's great famine, people have turned to cannibalism. Let's be honest, normal people. And studies have shown that the most normal person, when we're really desperate, can turn to things that we would not like to see. So I hope no one of us are ever tested. But it's not that simple question. Right now, when everything, like I said, when the tide is in, everything looks beautiful. When the tide is out, all kinds of things can happen. So really, we're talking about who are we? What are we made of? And I think it's maybe one of the biggest questions you have to ask yourself is, who am I? What defines me? But it's not so simple to answer this question, because for years and years, we've been conditioned and programmed to think about ourselves one way. And suddenly ask ourselves, is that really me? It's not a simple question. I mentioned this many times. I mentioned in the previous session. Often I ask somebody, who are you? What's the first thing you do? They give you their business card. And I say, your business card, that's what you do. That's not who you are. And some will say, okay, what can I tell you? I've been doing this for so long, what I do has defined who I am. Do you hear this? That what you do defines who you are. Isn't who you are should define what you do. When a captain is driving a ship, imagine the captain saying, the ship tells me where to go. No, you should be telling the ship where to go. Your soul should be telling your body where to go, not your body. The vehicle doesn't tell your soul where to go, but that's not the case in most of our lives. And this, again, is not meant to be critical. It's meant to be just aware of the forces that drive us. Do you ever ask yourself, are you, each one of you sitting right here, right now, are you really the real you, or are you a product of your parents? How much of you has been shaped by your parents' expectations, conditioning, even critique? You know, so when we say we're independent people, Independence Day, freedom. Freedom is not a simple thing. Yes, freedom, we're not sitting in a prison, in a physical prison and shackles. But psychologically, do you have the courage to be yourself? Or were you ultimately forced to conform? Because if not, you would have been mocked, or you would have been dismissed, or you would have been blacklisted. And again, this is just meant really to help everybody understand is to be introspective and be honest with ourselves. I asked this question many times. I don't really know if I have an answer. Because sometimes we're so programmed, we think we're not. You know, that's part of the programming. It makes you think that you're independent. You know? And how many choices are made for us? Like I remember meeting a guy and he said to me, he's a real free spirit. You know, he was like so proud of his free spiritness. I say, I see you dress in a unique way. Yeah, but then you find out that his dress was also determined by a few fashion industries. For those that want to dress differently, they also determine. You know, like they say, spontaneous dancing at 9 p.m. You know, it's not so spontaneous when it's planned. So even sometimes out of the box is also part of the box. So these are questions meant to really challenge ourselves, to really... One of the poems that always struck me as being it's a tragic poem, actually, by Oliver Wendell Holmes. He writes in a poem called The Voiceless. Does the name itself, The Voiceless. And he writes this line, I'm paraphrasing, I don't know if it's the exact quote, but it's something like this. Alas, to those that die with their song still inside them. Alas, to those that die with their song still inside them. You hear this? In other words, you have a song inside you, and you may live your entire life and never sing your song. You sang someone else's song. Maybe a nice song, but it's not your song. I remember my son, he was a little boy, maybe 7 years old, came home from school. He was all excited. So, you know, as a father, you also get excited. I said, why are you so excited? He says, well, I heard today a very good line in school. Someone told him, you were born an original, don't become a copy. You know, so I thought, yeah, that is very good. Okay, I never forgot this story. Over the years, my son today is a father of his own. I'm talking now 40 years later. I asked him recently, I said, you remember that day we came home from school all excited? He said, nope, he didn't remember, he had no recollection. To him it was just another day, you know. And I said, you know, there was a day, and I still remember what you told me. You were born an original, don't become a copy. So I said to him, so what happened with you after all these years? I mean, I know we talk pretty often. It's not like we haven't talked, but I never asked him this question. I said, so are you an original or a copy? And I wanted to know how much damage I did, you know? So he says to me, mind you, no pun intended, he happens to be a copywriter. He's a creative director and he writes copy. He's a very good wordsmith. He's very good with writing. So he says to me, I'm an original copy. I don't even know what that means. He didn't explain, and that was that. I was left hanging, whatever that means. It's an original copy. So the fact of the matter is, each of you, and every person on this earth, for that matter, every person who will watch this, is born an original. You have song, more than one song, many songs that are completely unique to you. Only you can sing them, and only you will be able to sing them the way you sing them. But the forces of life often obfuscate and block and lock that song away within us. And we may never even discover that song, let alone have the courage to sing it. And for many reasons, as I said before, conformity is a big one. Parental influences, social influences, people you think are your heroes, you think you want to be like them. And the real question is, have you discovering your own inner identity? Now, I'm not going to suggest and be presumptuous to think that none of you have figured out part of your identity. I'm sure that you have, and maybe even expressed it, and maybe very well doing so. You may be living up to your purpose right now. So I'm not speaking to anyone individually. I mean, that would be, I'm speaking the concept that I find in most people's lives, that most of us don't really know what that song is, or know what that mission is, as I've been articulating. So we're going to be discussing, of course, how to get there. But before you get there, you first have to know why you have to get there. Maybe you think you're there already. That's why it's important to know thy enemy, so to speak. You have to know the blocks, the obstacles. Before you talk about some truths, you have to say, okay, maybe what is blocking us from getting there? And I can tell you what's blocking us all, as I said, all the forces above. Every reason people go to therapy, everything we do to self-medicate, whether it's with physical medications or psychological ones, to numb ourselves, to distract ourselves, is dealing with some type of pain or trauma or loss that we may not have resolved. And what it's doing is it creates literally obstacles that don't allow you to find yourself. So if you grew up in a healthy home, I will take, which is frankly a minority, in a very healthy home where you were nurtured and loved and validated and allowed to spread your wings and be your own voice, yes, then you probably are able to sing your song to some extent. Even though you may have a healthy home, remember, society still doesn't exactly tolerate a true individuality as much as it likes to say it does. But even in the best case scenario, there's still many, many forces that are at work that are trying to keep us trapped in. I remember before 9/11, well, it was actually right after 9/11, a guy came to see me. He was a very sweet guy, but he was like really crying. He says, one of my best friends died. He was part of the Cantor Fitzgerald was one of the firms that suffered a lot of losses. If you remember, I think we were on the 10th floor or something. It's a whole story then. I think the CEO then, really did a good favor for all the families. It was, and he said to me, I was always jealous. Me and my friend who died that morning, we were good friends from childhood. And went to school together. We both went into finance. And he got, frankly, a far better job than I did. I would sit in some small office building a few blocks away from the World Trade Center. He had this floor, the best view, on the 110th floor or 105th floor, whatever. And I was always jealous of him. And you should know, this is the words he told me. He said, the world of finance sounds glamorous, but you know what? They destroy your soul. They force you to compete against your best friends. It's all about playing one against the other for profits. Everybody wants the promotion, everybody wants this and the extra profit. And frankly, I sold my soul to the extent that me and my best friend, we had a lot of run-ins because of that. So all that we were connected, when it came to a few dollars suddenly. And I used to be jealous of him, seeing him in that building, always wondering. And then that morning came, and I had a rude awakening, when his life was taken. And I realized, the pettiness that we get caught up in the material world, and we lose sight of what really, really matters. And all of us in some way have, betrayed ourselves. I think we could pretty much say we've all lost our innocence at some point. And you think about it, it's quite sad. But, we learn to numb our conscience, and we move on. We say, hey, everybody's there anyway. That naive, idealistic young man or young woman I am no longer, and I just have to adapt. Well, I'm here to tell you that I'm not a young man myself any longer, but I know one thing, that people I grew up around, and my environment that I grew up in, that was the key goal was never to lose that idealism, never to lose the sparkle in the eye, never to lose that passion, and age makes no difference. You can be as old as it is and still remain young in spirit. And whenever you throw in the towel and resign yourself because whatever life circumstances, and for me it's too late, or I'm damaged goods, is really the ultimate surrender and betrayal of yourself. So the topic we're talking about, mission, purpose, your own uniqueness, is one that affects everyone, and it affects also your attitude to yourself. Because when you do have a mission, it gives you a new lease on life. Because that mission does not age. If anything, you get more experience, so you're only better at it. The problem is when we succumb and we surrender to the materialistic forces in life, that's when things age. Remember, mortality only affects the physical world. Our physical looks, the food we eat, everything that's material in this world will deteriorate, will age, will erode, and will perish. But there's another side to us. The side that the mother of Lucy said, the other voice, not the voice of the id and the self, but the voice of the spirit. The spirit that is the real definition of who we are. So if you want to find your mission, you have to, in a sense, really ask yourself, what does my soul look like? Not my body. And I don't mean body what you see in the mirror. Not what the projected me. Not what people think I am. Not my business card. Not my job. Not my accomplishments. Those can be beautiful as well. I'm not suggesting some people's jobs are very noble and wonderful. But the you, the real you, is the song that comes from your soul. So the first and most important thing is to recognize that who you think you are may not be who you are. And as soon as you're ready to accept that, then we can start digging and saying, okay, so then let the real you stand up, which is what I'm going to address, of course. But I felt I can't talk about that if you don't first discuss. And if somebody feels they know who they are, then there's nowhere to go. So there is that other self, that inner self. And this is really getting to know yourself and getting to know your soul. The reason many of us will find it difficult finding our mission is precisely because we may have a very distorted and skewed version of what we really should be doing. I mean, the statistics show that most people don't like their jobs. They just don't like their jobs. They do it because they need to make a living. Many people started out wanting to do one thing, a different thing came their way, and they ended up doing it. There is a significant percentage of people who began not liking it, but then they learned to like it, And then there's some people still miserable, even while they're doing it for many years. There's a very small minority that can tell you that what they do is a labor of love from the outset. That they're not only doing what they love, but they're also making some money from it. It's not that common. It's a blessing to have that. And that's a person whose mission, whose real mission, is what they're able to accomplish. I know many, many people who are tremendously talented musicians and creative, but they couldn't make a living from it. So they essentially don't have the time to do it. But that's who they really are. When you see them playing music, you see they come alive. The job they do, they may be accomplishing it and they're trying to be ethical about it, but it's not where their passion is. So part of all this is all to review and understand all of that. So with that being said, I'll stop for a moment if anybody wants to ask anything about this first opening segment, and then I'll continue the next step of talking about how you begin the journey of finding yourself and finding your calling and finding that mission. But just in case anybody has any questions, please.
It seems that the foundation of who you are is built on a set of values. And that results in your character, whatever that is, good, bad, whatever. And that character then becomes your destiny. And I wonder to what extent you choose your values, since so many of them are interjected when we're 3, 4, 5, 6 years old.
Yeah, that's exactly the same question. I agree. So look, just to comment on that, I'm not suggesting, by the way, that everything our parents gave us is bad or toxic. Let me make that clear. There may be very, very values that they shared with us and they inculcated within us, even programmed us, that are beautiful values. There's no question in my mind. Even in really terrible homes, can't say everything was terrible, So, and that's what we expect. You don't want, as a parent, you don't want to be telling your children, hey, I'm not going to give you any values, you're going to have to figure it out on your own. Because that's the worst. Where are they going to figure it? Then they'll hear it from the street. They may hear it from people who are very nefarious, all kinds of dangerous forces. So there's no question that we do need to give our children a set of values as best as possible. But us as adults have to ask the question, what is it that I received in my childhood that I think I can objectively, as much as possible, confirm is something I want to embrace, and what are the things that maybe I was programmed that I shouldn't embrace or I should reject. We also receive from our parents prejudices and the stereotypes and biases and all, even things that are even hatred. If our parents hated someone, often we're taught to hate that person. But we are adults and we're able to challenge that. So I think it's a combination. I think finding yourself and then going back and saying, okay, what then have I been taught in my childhood, in school or parents, that works with what I've discovered? So obviously finding your mission requires a certain measure of objectivity. So that leads me to the next step. But anybody else want to weigh in? Oh, fine, we move on. Yep. Okay. So here's another way to phrase a question, which is, I think your question also helps segue it. How, if you're a subjective human being, and we know we have biases, our own internal biases, which include self-love, self-interest, we're biased. When it comes to ourselves, we're going to be biased. We have the biases that come from family, parents, friends, school, culture. We have the biases that come from society. You start watching the media, you start believing this news, and then you find out it's not necessarily true, and then you don't know who to believe. We have many forces that are trying. Then we have the marketers of the world, who are basically telling us what we should value and what we should buy, what we shouldn't buy. And they manipulate our emotions, to be very honest. And again, I'm not saying all marketing is bad, but a lot of it is selling pure garbage, making it look good. Even though they say the big cliche, don't judge a book by its cover, everybody judges a book by its cover. That's why they spend billions of dollars in designing covers and packages and so on. Certain products you'll never buy if the package doesn't look good. You open up the whole package, the product itself can be a little thing, but So again, this is not a critique of all packaging, but it tells us that the sizzle is sometimes much more intriguing than the steak. So then how do we make heads or tails? How can we, as subjective human beings, and subjectivity traps us in its own subjectivity, find any objectivity? So that leads me to this next piece I want to talk about, and then I'm going to go directly into how do we discover that mission. But these are part of the tools of understanding oneself. So the solution to subjectivity is simply this. It may sound simple, but it's not so easy. Is to recognize and acknowledge that you're subjective. As soon as a subjective person tells you they're objective, that's where all the problems begin. Because you're convincing yourself you're objective. If I were to say to you, what is reality? And you gave me an answer, you can only say is from my perspective, that's my answer. I'll give an example. Someone says, what does the horizon look like? So if someone's standing in a valley, they'll give you one answer. Someone standing on a plateau, they'll give you a second answer. Someone 20 feet on a mountain will tell you a third answer, and someone on top of Mount Everest will give you a fourth answer. And no one's lying. It's all from their perspective, their vantage point. And their answers will be completely different. If I said to you, what is reality? Most people would answer with the sensory tools, what I see, what I hear, what I taste, touch, and smell. But then if I said to you, 1 second, if that's reality, what about love? You can't see, hear, taste, touch, or smell it. What about ideas? What about microscopic subatomic particles? What about DNA? All that's not subject to the sensory tools. Is that not real? And then you say, oh, 1 second, okay, you're right. So I have to have other tools. Sir Arthur Eddington was a physicist in the mid-20th century, early 20th century, and he was asked, how do the physicists are coming up with all these bizarre conclusions about quantum mechanics that was being discovered then that were completely counterintuitive? Things were not like logical states of probability and uncertainty and determinism. And he gave this analogy. He said, no one's ever seen an atom, let alone a subatomic particle. And he gave this analogy of a fisherman that spread his net across all the seas and started gathering the fish from everywhere and began documenting size, shape, species, color. And after his long research, he comes back with a conclusion. The big conclusion was this: there are no fish in the sea that are shorter than a half-inch long. You hear? His little daughter sees that he's coming to this conclusion, so before he's going to announce it to all the wizards of the world, She says to him, Daddy, what are you talking about? We have a little aquarium here. There are little goldfish in there. They're shorter than a half-inch long. So I'm not sure how could you come to that conclusion. So of course, the next step was to look at the net. They looked at the net that he used. The net had spaces, the ropes were spaced a half-inch. So what happened to all the fish shorter than half-inch? They fell back into the water. So all he needed to add was that when you use a net with half-inch spaces, you're never going to catch fish that are shorter than a half-inch long. But you don't need a scientist for that. You don't need to spend years of research. So in other words, subjectivity and objectivity are exactly that. They're relative. It depends on your perspective. As soon as you admit that, humbly admit that, you're on your way to starting to find some truth. Anyone that says, I have a monopoly on absolute truth, nah. That doesn't work that way. You can say, from my perspective, from my experience, you must add that to be a truthful person. So the problem with subjectivity is when you convince yourself, I'm not subjective, I'm objective. I'm the only truthful one on earth, everybody else is subjective. That means you're not even open to hearing something new. How could you ever grow? How could you ever move? I mean, the truth is every habit, every addiction is really the trap that makes you convinced that you know exactly what's right for you. And you can be as far from the truth as possible. So having a friend, having a mentor, having someone that can offer a fresh, objective view on something is vital in all real growth. You'll not find anything in life where a person didn't have someone like that. They don't have to make the decisions for you, but they have to give you a perspective that offers objectivity. Now, we all know that when it comes to matters like legal matters or financial matters, no one's buying a house unless they're really naive, without a lawyer, or without somebody making sure that it's all being covered legally. You go to for legal advice or financial advice or medical advice. But how many of us make mistakes because we think we know better, and we don't go to the person who will give us subjective advice? Or it's like one accountant tells me they pay me top dollar not to listen to me. Some business owners don't want to know that they lost $5 million by a stupid mistake they made. So they pay the accountant, and when the accountant tells them you made a mistake, don't tell me I didn't make a mistake, But fine, that's part of the human absurdity. So getting back to this idea of objectivity, and maybe I'll share a nice humorous anecdote that captures it. There's in Jewish folklore, there's a city called Chelem. Chelem is a city of fools. Like they have all these jokes about the fools. So there's a story about the farmer from Chelem. So he had a little farm. Chelem was a small town. You can imagine his farm was very tiny. But it was his farm, it was his baby. And he took care of it. He knew every grain of soil. He inherited from his parents and grandparents, so it was his baby. Okay, well, one day, a big farmer from the United States, where are the biggest farms in this country? I don't know, Iowa? Kansas? Iowa? Okay. You were there? Huh? You own the farm there?
No.
Oh, okay, because then I'd say, okay. Anyway, so a big farm in Iowa, thousands of acres. Comes and visits the Chelem farmer. The Chelem farmer takes him for a tour. Doesn't take long. They sit down to dinner, and he says, what do you think about my farm here in Chelem? And the Iowa farmer, what does he say to him? He says to him, yeah, it's nice and cute, but it's so tiny. The Chelem farmer is taken aback, and he says, so tiny? How big is your farm back in Iowa? He says, is my farm? He's looking for a point of reference. He says, my farm? It takes me all day to travel with my tractor from one end of the farm to the next. And the Chelem farmer suddenly feels this empathy and compassion for the big city farmer and says to him, don't feel bad. I once had a tractor like that too. You understand? He didn't think it was the farm. He couldn't even fathom a farm so big. So he thought it must be an old shmata jalopy that he had that took him all day to crank up, to go from here to here. That's why it took all day. Didn't realize it was the farm. Because he wasn't malicious. He's subjective. He's narrow. His framework, he never can imagine. The whole country where he lived in, the whole city was smaller than the farm. So he was convinced it's the vehicle. We all have our farms. Let's just acknowledge that. Some of our farms are a little bigger, some a little smaller. And knowing that is critical to all growth, but particularly when it comes to understanding yourself. Okay. So with that, let's move now into the territory of understanding ourselves. And as you'll see, all these introductions are vital because without them, you're not going to be able to look at yourself objectively. So having someone, a friend, a mentor, an objective person in this exercise would definitely be helpful. And as you know, I did a course literally called this, Discovering Your Personal Mission. So I'm giving you a little summation of this course. So the next step is, so then how do you find out who you are when there's so many forces that have shaped you and continue to shape you? So how do you discover that? So let's call an exercise called Know Thyself. Let's start to get to know ourselves a bit. You have to ask some tough questions. And some are not so tough, but they can be very pleasant as well. And that is really a character analysis of your own psyche, of your own personality. What's your personality like? Some people are more cerebral, some are more emotional, some are more extroverts, some are more introverts, some are more good with numbers, others are good with creativity. And you can have several qualities, obviously, but you have to answer these questions. Because you're not going to be able to establish and say, my mission is something that goes completely counter to your personality. That wouldn't make any sense. Your personality has to be something that's aligned with your mission and vice versa. So it's really about understanding what kind of person you are. Very often you'll discover that a part of you, that really your strengths, you really don't use much. You know, there are people who are extremely empathetic. They're very, very good at empathy. They're sensitive to others and so on. And it could be the environment or the work you're in just doesn't allow you to do that, whatever reason. Or other personality things. So it's really a journey of self-discovery, which itself is very valuable, just to find out who you are. And even stating your strengths, what are your weaknesses. You know, some people, for example, are major givers. They love to give. It's easy for them to give. Other people, the exact opposite, very hard for them to give. They're great disciplinarians. They know how to withhold better than anybody. We all know that you need a balance. You need to give, but you also need to discipline your giving. You can't spoil people. That's also part of get to know yourself. It's about knowing and honestly and soberly looking at yourself in a very honest way. And the goal here is not to get a report card and be critical of yourself or be complimentary of yourself. The goal is to just have that awareness. So I developed a formula. The formula is, and you're probably familiar with it, some of you, the formula goes like this. POP plus P plus H equals M. I know, I should spell it out, right? It would be helpful. Here's how it goes. POPP stands for personality, opportunities, people, places. I'll explain momentarily. Plus P, passion. Plus H is higher calling or higher values. And equals M, mission. So it's a formula, it's a mathematical formula that if you can identify your personality and the opportunities that you're unique to you, and everyone has their unique opportunities, and the people you know, and the places you've been to, and then identify your passion or passions, and connect it to a cause that's greater than yourself. Can't just be for me. No mission can be just for yourself. I'll get to that also shortly. That will help you define your mission. Now, it sounds simple. It's harder than you think. First, it takes answering the questions, but then it also takes taking it all together and looking at the coordinates. But without this, I can't see a way that a person can find their mission. It's not going to just happen by accident. Yes, sometimes things happen in life. You meet the right person at the right time, and you end up doing something that really is aligned with yourself. I'm not suggesting that can't happen. But if you want to do it in a deliberate way, in a more methodical way, you need to go through this process. So let's go through them in a little more detail. Personality, as I mentioned, you need to know your personality. I'll use myself as a guinea pig if you wish. Is that kosher, a guinea pig? I think it is. No?
Yeah.
But you don't eat them, right? So good, that's good. I use myself as an example. So I happen to be blessed that it didn't take me many, many years. In my teenage years when I was a rebel without a cause, or a rebel without a mission, meaning I was rebellious and I was challenging and I was restless and was in a way desperate even to find something that I felt was meaningful. I wanted something in my life that I felt was worth fighting for. I saw a lot of mediocrity. I saw a lot of things that to me were uninspiring, not necessarily bad, but not enough to drive me. And then in my own way, I found through my own efforts, and sometimes not just efforts, gifts that were given to me. I met the right people, the right time, the right place. And I discovered spirituality, or the teachings of spirituality, the experience of spirituality. I like to equate it with hearing the song. I heard the music. I heard music that resonated with me. A deeper sense of self, purpose, life. And it changed my life because I was looking for something like that. And what happened? Not with a great plan, by trial and error, I discovered I could write. I discovered I could communicate. By no means was I very good at it. I may still not be very good at it, but I got better. And I began to do it. I enjoyed it, and and I was persistent, and I hung around people that were good at it, and I learned from the best. And I tried to find the best. And what I can say today, without hesitation, going back to that I'm today 17, I always like to say I'm 17 years old with 49 years of experience. So you want to calculate my age? Okay. You got it. I always give everybody a moment. People like to do that, I don't know, for some reason. And I still that 17-year-old, and what I discovered was my mission, which I can say my mission statement is to use my communicating skills, my ability and understanding the human condition, my care about it, my empathy, to use my skills of writing and teaching and presenting, of helping people find their mission, helping people get clarity, to get rid of the clutter of their lives, to find their calling. And that mission has not changed an iota from day one when I was 17, 18 years old. What's changed is the methods. In those days, there was no internet, there were no videos, there was no YouTube, there was none of that. But that was just methods. But the mission remains the same. I can elaborate more, but that was what it comes down to. And today I had an organization called the Meaningful Life Center, Meaningful Life. Help people find the life skills to live the most meaningful life possible. And I'm using my skills. Now, I recognize those skills, not early necessarily. I recognized I had something and then it developed. So I had to know my personality. If my personality was not, I couldn't write, and I couldn't communicate, then this mission wouldn't work. Then I'd have to find a different way of doing it. I'm not saying you can't help people other ways, but for me, it was very much part of that. Those are my skills. And I developed those skills. So everybody here has your unique personality. That's no question. The question is identifying it. So I actually worked hard on creating a full questionnaire that helps people ask the right questions to be able to start essentially identifying, like diagnosing your personality, if you wish, whether it's the giver and taker. So I developed it in the cognitive and emotional and behavioral skills of defining yourself. But it's something you can begin doing immediately, even as we speak. I mean, I wouldn't suggest right now thinking it through, or else you won't listen to what I'm saying. But this is really, it takes work. I'm not saying, and it's actually very intriguing work, because you're learning about yourself. And you'll be surprised. You'll learn things about yourself that you did not imagine. I'm sure some things won't be surprising. Some things will be pretty obvious, but there'll be things that will be surprising to you. Like even that question, giver and are you a giver that doesn't know how to stop, or you don't know how to give? A lot of people don't like that question. It's somewhat disarming. They start thinking, oh, 1 second, what, am I a stingy person? Or I'm what we call it discretion, etc. And the same thing with other aspects of ourselves. For example, are you a pleaser? Do you avoid confrontation? Maybe there are situations you should you should confront. How many times have you stepped over or stepped on because you don't want confrontation? Is it the right thing to do, not the right thing to do? These are all requires, that's why I elaborated before on objectivity, because it's easy to just say, no, I'm right, I know what I'm doing. No, sometimes it has to be challenged because you want to know, is it the right thing that you should be doing? So we have plenty of things to discover in our own personality types. just for us, and not really an aside, but I will say this, I didn't want to really elaborate on it, but going back to the question of parental influences, the more you understand your personality, then you could ask yourself this question. How much of this did it come from my parents, and how much is it my own? Because you may discover that you have a feature in you that your mother and father didn't have, which is interesting. That means that did not come from them. They may have imposed their preference, and maybe you're still following what they wanted to do, but it's not your natural self. You know, for example, I met many people who told me, very charitable people, very giving people, but they don't give. They said, because my father and mother, every time I was giving, they always would criticize me. Why are you just helping people? You have to think about it. So I basically, they essentially silenced my natural tendency to give. And for this individual, for him, it was actually a freedom to discover that he's really a giver. He doesn't have to necessarily listen to those haunting voices of his parents. Now, maybe they meant well, but they definitely altered his trajectory and his natural, and he really was miserable because every time he wanted to give something, he always remembered his father telling him, no, you don't just give, you take care of yourself first. Just to give you an example. So this exercise can also help you start distinguishing between the things that are you, the things that others have demanded of you or expected of you or shaped you. The next thing is opportunities, the POPP. Opportunities, again, is pretty straightforward. Each of us have different opportunities that come our way. You know, someone may have made an offer to you, maybe someone that you work with, etc., different opportunities. So that needs to be defined because your opportunities are part of the signposts that help you to guide you toward your mission. Then come the people you know. Every one of us has our circle, whether it's family or friends or strangers, but people that are in our sphere. And then finally, the places you've been to. You know, it's unlikely that your mission is to go do something in New Zealand if you've never been there, you weren't born there, you're never going there. Just as an example. You know, why would you suddenly pick yourself up to go? Fine, maybe a nice tourist place. Most likely, the places you've been to is part of where your mission is. That's why you're in those places. That's why you live there. That's why you've been led there. And this goes back to the concept of providence, of who things we didn't make choices about. You know, when we were born, where we were born, where we lived, where we traveled to. So places is also a key element of helping develop the coordinates of your life. So there you go, the personality, opportunity, people, places. You come away a picture from that, a pretty good picture of what's in your, let's call it, in your arsenal. Okay, we haven't yet directed it, but it's there. It's part of who you are. Now, the next thing is passion. And this is knee-jerk. You don't have to think it through. This should come straight from the heart. What are you passionate about? And hopefully the passions I'm talking about are healthy ones and productive ones. You know, passion. What are you passionate about? And it could be anything. It could be music. It could be helping people. It could be whatever it may be. And again, in the course that I did, I wrote many options, but this is really up to you to define. Why is this critical? Because remember, passion is the fuel. Well, we've discussed before the coordinates. Passion is that fuel, the thing you enjoy most, the thing that you're excited about most, which is most likely the things we are passionate about are going to be the things we stick with. And it's not going to be an uphill battle to do when you're passionate about it. In addition, passion just adds a whole dimension of drive and enthusiasm and all that comes with something that someone's passionate about. One of the first questions I ask people who come to me for help in any given area, whether they're dealing with struggling with addictions or other challenges, I always ask, what's your passion? Why don't you do something that you're passionate about? Once a day, before you go to sleep, make sure you do something that you like. So at least you go to sleep knowing that today I did something positive, something I enjoyed. And it's interesting, people's reaction to that, you know, because sometimes we get so overwhelmed by all the negativity in our lives, we don't think about what do you really enjoy. You like music? Fine. So listen to music before you go to sleep for a half hour, for 10 minutes, whatever it may be. You know, I mean, there are many ways to express it. So that's passion. And the next is H, the higher calling. If you notice, I mentioned before the mission with Google. Even though we all know these companies are there to make money, and billions of dollars at that. But you'll never see a mission statement that says we're here to make money. Or we're here to have happy clients. Or happy employees. First of all, any business is supposed to make money. That's generic. That's not unique. And it's more than that. You make money because you're serving a need that people feel you have to offer them. If you don't describe the need you're filling, why would anyone give you any money? I quoted Warren Buffett. I'll quote another Warren Buffett. Not necessarily he's my hero, but he has good quotes. He's a successful man. So he says like this, he's never seen a company whose customers are delighted that should fail. He never saw a company whose customers are delighted that company would fail. He says it's a lesson that 90% of companies don't live up to. It seems so obvious. Make your customers happy. But they don't, because everyone finds excuses and whatever it is. So the idea that having, the filling a need, so Google is not making money. They're saying, we're giving you search engines, we're giving you tools to find anything you want on the internet. Now they have to live up to it. If they can't deliver 80 or 90% of the time, you'd run to a different search engine. So, but they're making a promise, and people see that it's working for them. The same thing with any good company. The mission is never about the company. It's about what are we doing for you. Now there, you could say, fine, their intention is money, but they still have to deliver, or else they're not going to last. You can only fool people that much. Now Google has to go through tremendous changes because AI and all that's coming is going to do results better than Google searches. So Google has to include that. The next thing you're going to see is results that come from AI and ChatGPT or whatever they're calling their artificial intelligence, just as an aside. But to get back to the point here, you have to connect your mission now. Or you have to connect yourself to something, to a higher calling. So I'm going to give you an example of a real life story. There's a guy that was to come to my classes in New York City for a number of years. Remember, he used to always sit in the back. He was very attentive. He took notes. And he was a very, very interesting guy, but he never came over to speak with me, so I never intruded in anyone's privacy. I didn't know why he's there, what he's looking for. One day he does come over to me after the class. Can I have a few words with you? Yeah. Very eloquent, very well-spoken. I saw he was very educated. I saw that he came from clearly from an affluent home. Then he told me his name, and then I knew it was a world-famous father he had. That's why I'm not mentioning the name, because he asked me always to keep his anonymity. And he says to me, so now that you hear who I am, you probably think I'm the most blessed person on earth, right? I can do anything I like. I have all the money in the world. He says, yeah, but I am a 35-year-old young man in a gilded cage. I can fly anywhere. I could have anyone I want. I could have as many girlfriends, as many boyfriends, whatever I want I can have. It's all my father's money. He doesn't limit it. He gives me anything I want. But all these freedoms mean nothing, because I feel miserable. I've not accomplished anything with my life. And I am in a gilded cage. Yeah, it's a golden cage, but it's a big cage, but it's a cage. And I'm emasculated. I mean, he seems like completely self-aware and all that. And he had all the right words and everything. So I said, okay, so what do you want from me? You even know yourself. So he said, I've been coming to your classes and I love what you teach. And I feel that you may have an answer for me. I don't know why, but I just feel that you may have something to say. So my first question, I asked him bluntly, I said, are you willing to say no to all that money? To just simply not take it? It has to be at your own volition. No one's going to take it away from you. He says, no, I don't think I could do that. I don't have that discipline. It's just I'm too spoiled. Those were his words. That's not, because I said that maybe your redemption is just you have to live a normal life and not take money that you didn't earn, even though your father will keep then when I heard that, I said to him, I really think you've written your own life sentence. You're not ready to do that. What shall I say to you? I quoted a line which I think I'm going to use this weekend when I go to Florida. I think it's Eckhart Tolle that said it, but it's a good line. He says that secret to life is that you have to die before you die. And then you realize that death is not real. So I told him, I said, you have to die before you die. You're not dead. You're in prison, but you didn't die. You didn't give up anything in life. And there's a price to pay for what you're looking for. The price is to give something up. Anyway, he was very emotional, and I was very sad for him because he really was sincere. He just was trapped. But then suddenly, I don't know what it was, I had an epiphany. And you'll see exactly how this played itself out. It's an amazing story, as you'll see. So I said to him, you know what? I have an idea. You ask me my advice, I have advice. I think you should, once a week, volunteer to go to a home for special children, Down syndrome or other handicaps, and take a walk, offer to take a walk with the children for lunch or during the day in a park or something. Just be there. There's plenty of places like that, they always could use help. He looked at me like I was crazy. He said to me, okay, I'll hire someone to do that. No, I said, no, that's not the point, my friend. To hire someone, no, you have to do it, you. And don't tell me you don't have time, because you just pontificated how you have all the time in the world and you have nothing to do with your life. So you have time, so go do it, why not? The more he resisted, the more I realized, that's it, I found something. That there's no way he can. So I said, so don't come to me and tell me you want my help, and then you don't listen. And it's not costing you anything, you don't have to do anything. I'm not telling you, if I told you go become a garbage collector or go live like a homeless person, fine. This is nothing humiliating about this, it's very respectable, you're doing a kind act, you're virtuous, you're helping children, and no one will even know who you are, you don't have to tell anyone, it's not like, so don't tell me you want help and then not listen. So he, to his credit, he did it. He found the place. I said, if you can't find a place, I'll help you find a place. He did it. A few months later, he comes to me, he says, just for the record, I'm doing it 3 times a week, not once a week. He says, it was tremendous. I took one walk, and those children do more for me than I do for them. They have such love, and they don't know who I am, they have no airs about them, they're pure, and I'm learning about real love. Anyway, maybe a half a year passed, and he came to me and he said to me, I found my calling. Because I talked about calling. He said, I found my calling. I'm going to build a home for special children. Because now I've learned things that I see some of these schools don't have, and they may not be interested in my ideas. So I'm going to build my own thing. I have the money, obviously. He's a changed person. Now we're talking 6 years later. He's married with children of his own. And he's a changed person. He's found his calling, his mission. So he would completely never have been emerged because he was completely comfortable, so to speak comfortable. He wasn't comfortable. He was comfortable on a surface level. He had all his teddy bears. He had all his comfort zones, his security blankets. But he was miserable. And that's what got him out of it. And he found a skill that he had, which was true empathy. And he acted on it. But I basically found him something to get out of his comfort zone, to get him out of the rut, so to speak. So it's a perfect example. It's his passion, everything I described before. And it's a higher calling, because that's what he needed. Something was not about him. If I told him to go travel across the whole world and just visit different countries, yeah, he does that all the time. But here it was not about him, it was about the children. It was about helping someone else. And here's a perfect example. So you take the POPP, and you take the passion, and you take the higher calling, and you have a mission. I go back to myself. So my teaching and writing and so on is to help people find their calling, is to help people find their mission, is to help people find the deeper meaning of their lives and every aspect of their lives. So am I gratified by it? Absolutely, it's very gratifying work. It's work, but it's gratifying. But it's not about myself. It's about serving something. So it goes back to what I said before of who we are. If we're just takers, if we're just the id, pleasure seekers, then this whole thing doesn't, then the whole idea of a mission, frankly, almost is unnecessary. What's the mission? The mission is to whatever will make you happy. Instant gratification could be the mission. But if you think about it, this alone is the best proof that we're not just pleasure seekers, because we'll never be happy with that alone. Because there's a part of our soul that is transcendent, that needs something greater than ourselves. And ultimately a mission means that. When an astronaut goes to space, they know they're on a mission. They're going somewhere, to the moon, to Mars, wherever it may be. And that mission dictates every detail of their lives, how they eat, when they eat, every detail. If the astronaut decides, you know what, I don't want to be all these shackles. I don't want to eat when you tell me to eat. He'll jeopardize not only the mission, his life, because he knows every second of his life, every second of his journey is part of a destination. We don't feel that way. I will tell you, this was a gift that I did not work on. I grew up in an environment. My father was this way. My mother was this way. My parents, my family, and also my environment. I grew up around my mentor that I refer to often, the Rebbe. This was people completely dedicated 24/7 to a mission. To a mission. A mission to change the world in some way, to make it better. So when you're surrounded by it, by osmosis, it became part of my nature. It wasn't hard for me to, I didn't find it through misery or through loss. I found it because it came my way. So I want to make it clear, it was on a platter. The only credit I can take is that I didn't ignore it. But I know other people come to it through pain, through loss, through the back door, so to speak. But the point is that that this really defines who you are. And I can tell you right now, no matter what you do in your life right now, I'm not suggesting quit your job and go cold turkey. Whatever it is that you're doing, if you ask these questions, remember, the question of a wise person is have the answer. You ask these questions and you begin defining the coordinates of your life, you will come to that mission. And it won't happen overnight. It may take some time. These things take time to develop. You know, I think Google paid billions of dollars to find their mission. I don't know if it's billions, but definitely millions. Here we're not talking about money, but it takes time because it has to gel. You have to digest it and process it and so on. But that's fine. It's a work in progress. But you will discover, as I said, the key things that define who you are. I go back to the personality, opportunity, people, places, the passion, the higher calling, equals the M, the mission. And when you find that, the mission becomes the hub, that suddenly the fragments of our lives, all the details, become directed by something. So in my book, Toward a Meaningful Life, I have a chapter called The Day of Life there. It's the end of section 1. And I spell out an exercise which really drives the point home. If you were to, and do this, try it out tonight, tomorrow, take a piece of paper and list everything that you did from the morning till the night, from the moment you awoke to the moment you went to sleep, everything. Woke up, pressed the snooze button, whatever. Finally got up, whatever the regimen is, exercised, showered, brushed your teeth, got dressed, tied your shoelaces, okay, had a coffee. I'm not going to go through whatever it is, you get the idea. This part is the easy part. And just list it. You know, went to work or worked from home, had a meeting, important meeting, many non-important meetings, you know, through the day, and then of course the evening, whatever it is. And then you'll have approximately, I've tested this, around 100 items. From trivial things like tying your shoelaces or untying them, to more important things, very important things. And then try to connect a line, a thread, that connects many of these items. You'll find very few are connected. You know, you commuted because you had no choice, but it's not like an end in itself. So you'll have a bunch of fragments. Some are related to one another, but many are not. Now, that doesn't sound like much. Okay, so what's so big about that? But then think about it this way. These fragments start accumulating day after day, and week after week, and month after month, and year after year, and then decade after decade, and now we can say century after century, millennia after millennia. And suddenly you have these millions, or whatever the number is, fragments of a bunch of details in your life, which you're not really seeing because they're happening while they're happening, but all these minutiae. So doesn't it make sense that after a while it's going to create some type of midlife crisis, or some type of confusion, or some type of disorientation, all these details, and then this one's dragging you this direction, and this one this direction, and then people's expectations and demands. This is a perfect example of a life without a mission. It's like, what drives your life? Whoever yells loudest, whoever is putting most pressure on you, whoever is demanding more, or whatever other forces in your life. Fear may be driving, other factors. Mission works the exact opposite. This is called a survival-oriented life, a survival-centric life. Mission-centric life, it all begins very differently. Everything starts with a mission. And then everything else is an expression of that mission. So yes, even when you tie your shoelaces, you can spiritualize that experience. Because you're saying, I'm here in this world to take my soul and all its unique skills and some way improve the world and the corner of the world in which I live. And you do that all the time. You're commuting. You'll say, what's commute have to do with it? Yeah, you may be sitting near someone and you smile to them. You never know what a smile can do, or you say a kind word. In other words, you're taking initiative all the time because you're not just sitting there and reacting, you're being proactive. And the simple formula is this: either you're influencing or you're being influenced. And the best defense is offense. The more you are proactive, the more you are in control. And that changes everything. Besides the fact that it builds confidence, because you feel you can initiate, you're not just reacting to someone else, it also creates surprising situations. You know, a smile can change lives. It's true. I just use an example of my good friends that I met here, right? Danielle and Anne. So how do I know them? Why am I even here? It's a perfect example. They found me on the internet somewhere, in YouTube, right? And then took this course on a mission in life, and then started reaching out to my office, and we met them, and well, I never met either of them till today. And then one thing led to another. I began this organization and said, let's do a, what do we call a launch? What do you call this? They took the bull by the horns, initiated on their own to bring to this community a deeper spiritual type of meaning. And I have no doubt that it'll grow and succeed in tremendous ways. I find that tremendously empowering because it's completely driven by exactly what we're talking about here. It's not like I called them and said, hey, maybe you want to do something for me, a favor, or this is what I do. You initiated it and brought me, which I find to be leadership, a type of leadership. And whoever you bring, I'm not just saying it myself, whoever it be that you do. Perfect example. And this is how you change the world. This is where you move from being a victim, or let's call it a product of circumstances. Instead, you're controlling your circumstances. Now, we can't change the events in our lives, but we can control how we navigate them. And I don't know your whole history, I don't know everything. I mean, I pick up here a bit of pieces. But bottom line is, whatever it is, it led you to this place. And I'm not just saying to acknowledge you, you're also now a living example of what I'm saying here. And I have no doubt that this becomes part of your mission and may be your biggest mission of all. And here you have a room full of people talking about these matters. Hopefully this will have a lasting impact, and it will have a perpetual impact that will continue to have a ripple effect. So that's just an example. I hope you don't mind me using it.
Well, I appreciate it because to extend it even further, then we've got to connect to people that we've never met, and then bring
exactly right. And remember,
the conversation. So thank you all for coming too. You're all part of that.
There we go. So we can give everybody an applause just for that. And remember, this world of 8 billion people is just a bunch of units like ourselves, single people like ourselves. There's just a lot of them. So that's not surprising, especially with technology today, that what they call the butterfly effect, a butterfly flaps its wings in Kansas City and it created a typhoon in Singapore or whatever, or a monsoon in Phoenix, right? So the same thing in a positive way. Good deeds have a way of having it could be sometimes like a time capsule, a delayed release. What do they call it? A delay reaction, like like those the things that release in increments. Forgot what it's called. Whatever it is. Okay. The point is that we all have the power to initiate, but you need to not just have that attitude, you have to also be around people that do that and also understand yourself and use your skills. So I have no question here, every one of you. Going back to Oliver Wendell Holmes' words, alas to those that die with their song still inside them. I have no doubt in my mind that you will have beautiful songs inside you. You're probably singing some of them. Maybe you're singing and no one hears it yet. Maybe you don't even hear it yet. But the goal of all this is to really help you discover your song and sing it. And know that you have something unique to contribute that's indispensable, that only you and only you can do. I want to conclude with one very moving story, if I may. I know with our time. Yeah, we're fine, right? Okay. So this is a story that happened in St. Louis, actually, years ago. So I went to speak there after my book tour, The Meaningful Life, was published. So I went on a book tour. So one of the cities I ended up was in St. Louis. I remember it was a Monday night, and a very large crowd came, not because of me actually, because that night in all the JCCs across the country, they had these memorials for Rabin. Remember the prime minister who was assassinated in Israel. So they had these memorial service all over the country. So I happened to be the speaker that was scheduled earlier, so that was it. So instead of a few hundred people, it was a few thousand people. And maybe it was meant because of this story. So then afterwards I signed books. There was a long line of people. And after I got back to New York, I get this letter, I think it was an email, if I recall, from a woman who writes, I was in the audience in St. Louis, and I was waiting online, but then I decided I got cold feet. So it was also a long line. So I decided rather to write a letter to you. And she writes the following. Her words were so, they remain etched inside my soul till this day, because they were so powerful and definitive in many ways, like a definitive moment. She writes, I'm a 47-year-old executive that works in a prominent firm here in St. Louis. And by all accounts, I'm a success story. I'm very well connected, a lot of equity, make a lot of money, people respect me, I have influence, power. I've climbed the ladder all the way to the top. But the truth is, beneath the veneer of success lies a woman in shreds. You see, my soul was murdered when I was a young child due to the abuse that I endured in my home. She writes physical, emotional, psychological, and sexual abuse. So I'm really dead. All types of therapy have not worked for me. Relationships are a mess. I don't trust, people don't trust me. I'm always testing people, testing until I destroy any relationship. And what do people like me do? When we lack inner control, we create outer control. So I became super ambitious and super driven, success on every level. It's just a way to mask my inner pain. And it doesn't really work, but I go day by day, I breathe in, breathe out. Often I'm suicidal, but I loathe myself. I actually loathe myself. And I've long given up hope. Okay, somebody gave me a copy of your book, Toward a Meaningful Life. And I'm not religious. I actually don't respect it. Anything that my parents were involved with, I run the other direction. And but something intrigued me. I started leafing through the pages, and then one line jumped out at me. A line in the chapter on birth. The line says, "Birth is God saying you matter." And I read it again. Birth is God saying you matter. And I read it again. Birth is God saying you matter. And I'll read it the rest of my life. After 47 years, I don't know why, suddenly like a silver bullet between my eyes, something struck me in the deepest chord inside within me. A certain resonating truth that despite what my parents said about me, despite how they treated me, like worse than garbage, worthless, despite what society says and looks at us as another statistic on someone's balance sheet, despite the fact that we value people for their looks and for their buying power and for their social status and for their influence and how much and for their achievements, despite all that, I matter to the one that matters most, God. And even if I do nothing on a certain day, and even if I don't look good, and even if I don't accomplish anything, I'm God's child. And I'm loved unconditionally. So though I have many years to heal, this is how she concludes. It's quite eloquent if it weren't for the circumstances. Though I have many years to heal, I have my work cut out for me. I need to bypass the infected arteries that were so toxified by my abuse and reconnect to that pure moment of birth when God said, you're my child, you're indispensable, I love you forever, no matter what. Birth is God saying you matter. And then she concludes, thank you for giving me back my life. That was the letter. Now, let me tell you, I was literally sobbing in tears after reading it. Even now when I repeat it, it brings it back. Firstly, a woman's complete stranger sharing with me this sacred dignity, this sacred, it's her sacred trust. I went back to read the book, actually, my own book. I wanted to read it from her eyes, the chapter. You read it, you write it from your perspective. And I wanted to see how she was reading it. And I read it differently, of course. And then I wrote back to her, first of all, thanking her and offering her any help I can give, friendship. And I asked her permission to tell the story. But she gave permission, but she asked me not to give her name and not to, because she doesn't want people calling her with sympathy or calling her with similar stories. So we still stay in touch. It's years later. She's retired since, but we stay in touch. And from time to time, we communicate. So over the years, this story continued to haunt me. And I used to think to myself, and I started asking myself and asking audiences, do you think you matter? So again, people giggle, and of course I matter. I have a healthy ego. I have a plaque on the wall. I have awards. I've accomplished this, I've accomplished that, and many have. No one's denying that. It's not only an ego trip. But then I rephrased the question. I said, let's put it this way. Not whether you think you matter. If you were never born, would it make any difference to anyone? Remember, before you were born, it wouldn't be a tragedy if you didn't appear because no one's expecting you. So once we're here, circumstantially, of course we find reasons to justify our existence. But if you were never born, would it really make a difference? There's 8 billion people on this planet now. Another grain of sand on a beach, what difference does it make? And when people hear that, they say, that's a good question. I don't know if I matter on a cosmic level, on an absolute. Yes, I matter to my family. I matter to my co-workers. I matter to people who know me, people I've helped, people who've helped me. But it matter absolutely? Nah, most people say, I don't think so, or I'm not sure. So then I say, if you don't really matter absolutely, then your choices don't matter either. What difference does it make? At the end of the day, we're all going to be buried in the same earth, or cremated for some. I don't want to mention that, but I just felt to be all-inclusive here. I don't mean anyone here. We're all going to live for a long time. We're all going to once leave this earth. What difference does it make? Like another set, a grain of sand on a beach. If you don't really matter. So how invested can we really say that my choices and my actions really matter on a cosmic level? And then I wrote back this letter to her once years ago. I said, I have to thank you because I never asked that question. Because I did have the luxury. I did grow up in a home. No parents are perfect, but my parents never tell me I matter. As a matter of fact, I'm the oldest of 5 children. And the oldest gets spoiled a bit more. You could ask my siblings. One thing I can tell you, siblings go to therapy for their older. Not you don't go to therapy for them. So that's just for the record. And yes, so I always took it for granted. But I say I never was challenged. Sometimes they say the eclipse of the sun teaches you more about the sunlight than does the sun. You didn't have that luxury. So you had to ask that question, do you really matter? And you came to the real answer. Because if I matter because my parents love me, what happens if one day, God forbid, they woke up and they don't like me that much? So my stocks go down? If it's dependent on other people's valuing me? Even my parents. But you came to the true answer. It doesn't matter what people doesn't matter what industries say. It doesn't matter what even parents say. You matter because God put you here. The Bible begins, what's a human being? Created in the divine image. You're a piece of the divine. You're a piece of eternity. In William Blake's words, eternity in an hour, infinity in the palm of your hand. You are a piece of infinity on this earth, and that is indispensable. And this woman taught that to me, and I thanked her for it. I said, I'm envying you, and I wish you had a beautiful life, but you should know that you discovered a truth that many of us don't discover, because you died before you die. You discovered something, the ultimate truth, that we matter because we have something that's absolutely necessary. And I've developed many theories on this topic. I thought to myself often that maybe many of us are driven to succeed, ambition, determination, because maybe we're trying to hide a subconscious fear that we really don't matter, so we're trying to prove that we do. But the only reason we really matter is on a cosmic level, on an absolute level, is because we have something that's absolutely necessary. And when you know that in your heart and soul, it changes everything. Because it changes your choices, it changes your decisions. Everything is driven by a certain mission. That's the point. You're sent on a mission. You're that astronaut in space, and everything you do matters. It's not insignificant. It's not like who really cares, no one noticed, and so on. You know that joke, the kids in lunchtime in school, they're supposed to take an apple and a piece of cake. So one of them takes 2 apples, and the teacher says, oh no, you don't know God is watching. So his friend whispers to him, come, let's take a few pieces of cake. He says, what do you mean God's watching? No, God's watching the apples, you know? So who really cares? Nobody's really watching, and this detail, that detail. No, every detail matters. Look at a computer program. Add 1 dot, or take out 1 dot in a computer program of hundreds, thousands of lines, and the whole program will go kaput. 1 mutant cell among trillions of cells can create havoc. So the point is, everything matters, and you matter. And this is what I learned from that woman. So interestingly, the deepest secrets of life you learn from people who their lives have been eclipsed and do not have the luxury. And again, I don't wish it on anyone, but there are things that emerge in those given situations. And she did come to the right conclusion. That's the true reason we matter. Now, we have parents that nurture that and support that, by all means, and we have friends, that's a great blessing. But let's not forget where it originates from. So, in conclusion, I want to say this. I'm meeting many of you here for the first time, at least physically. I'm sure spiritually we've met. To me, the greatest gift in life, the greatest dignity of life, is to intersect, cross-pollinate with the majestic, unique souls that you are. Because no matter what you think about yourself, some of you may love yourself, some of you may hate yourselves. Or maybe it's one day like this, one day like that. The point of the matter is there's something inside you, inside me, inside all of us that is absolutely necessary. And we're here to play music together, like a symphony, a cosmic symphony. Each of us with our song within us, and each complementing the other, each needing each other. So you're absolutely necessary, and we also absolutely need each other. So to me, there's no greater experience in life than when we can play music together, we can jam together. Spirits, kindred spirits, each with our own flavor, with our own diversity, but harmony within diversity. I thank you again for making this happen. So we are in some way fulfilling our mission as we speak right now, and may this really be a springboard that each of us go back independently, respectively, to our corner and process it and use these tools to really discover yourself and discover your great contribution that you can make, because the world cannot be complete without you doing so. Thank you so much.